The story of Braille begins in the early 19th century, in a world where blindness meant exclusion, silence, and dependence. Before Braille, those who lost their sight had almost no access to books, letters, or education. Reading for the blind was a challenge that few dared to imagine could ever be solved. In France, at the beginning of the 1800s, schools for blind children were rare, and even the most progressive institutions relied on large embossed letters that were difficult to read and expensive to produce. It was in this world that a young boy named Louis Braille was born in 1809 in the small village of Couvray, near Paris. His father was a harness maker, and little Louis often played in his father's workshop, curious about the tools and the craft. One day, when he was just 3 years old, Louis accidentally injured his eye with an all-sharp tool used for punching holes in leather. The wound became infected, and despite medical efforts, the infection spread to his other eye, leaving him completely blind by the age of 5. His family was heartbroken, but they never treated him as helpless. His parents, Simon René and Monique Braille, encouraged him to learn and explore the world around him through touch, sound, and memory. At a time when blind children were often marginalized, Louis's father built him wooden letters so he could trace shapes with his fingers. His mother taught him songs and prayers, nurturing his intellect and curiosity. By the age of 10, Louis's brilliance had attracted the attention of the local priest, who arranged for him to attend the Royal Institute for Blind Youth in Paris, the world's first school for the blind, founded by Valentine Hauy. There, Louis encountered the limitations of the existing reading system for blind students. Books were created by embossing large Latin letters onto paper, making them bulky, slow to produce, and nearly impossible to use for writing. Students had to memorize entire pages by touch, and the limited collection of books meant that only a few could benefit from them. But Louis was determined to find a better way. In 1821, a pivotal event changed his life forever. A French army captain named Charles Barbier visited the school to demonstrate his invention, night writing. Barbier had developed a system of raised dots and dashes that allowed soldiers to communicate silently in the dark, without using light or speech. The system used patterns of 12 raised dots, representing sounds rather than letters. However, it was too complex and cumbersome for daily use. The young Louis Braille, only 12 years old at the time, was fascinated by the idea. He realized that tactile dots could be the key to creating a practical writing system for the blind. He studied Barbier's system meticulously, identified its weaknesses, and began experimenting with his own designs. Louis's approach was revolutionary. Instead of using large patterns that required 2 fingers to read, he simplified the system to a 6-dot cell that could be felt with a single fingertip. Each cell, made up of 2 columns and 3 rows, could represent a letter, a number, or a punctuation mark, depending on the arrangement of raised dots. It was elegant, compact, and perfectly suited for touch reading. He developed the first version of his code by 1824, when he was just 15. His classmates quickly recognized how efficient it was. They could read and write faster, take notes during lectures, and share messages privately, something impossible with the old embossed letter system. Braille's invention spread through the school by word of mouth, as students secretly used it to communicate, even though the school authorities discouraged it. In 1829, Louis Braille published the first book explaining his system, method of writing words, music, and plain songs by means of dots, for use by the blind and arranged for them. He later refined it in 1837, adding mathematical and musical notations, making Braille a complete literacy system rather than just an alphabet. It enabled blind people not only to read literature, but also to engage in science, mathematics, and the arts. Louis himself was a talented musician, serving as the church organist and later teaching at the same institute where he had once studied. His musical Braille system allowed blind musicians to read and compose music independently, a transformation that opened the doors of creativity and education for generations to come. Yet despite the brilliance of his invention, recognition came slowly. The sighted administrators at the Institute for Blind Youth were resistant to change and continued to prioritize embossed print systems. They viewed Braille's method as too radical, fearing it would isolate the blind from mainstream culture. But among the blind students, Braille's code became a quiet revolution. They copied his manuals by hand, spreading the system to other schools and across countries. Louis Braille, humble and dedicated, never sought fame. He lived a modest life, devoting himself to teaching and refining his code. Tragically, he suffered from tuberculosis, which gradually weakened him in his later years. In 1852, at the age of 43, he passed away in Paris, unaware that his creation would one day transform the world. After his death, the spread of Braille accelerated. In 1854, 2 years later, the French government officially adopted it as the standard reading and writing system for the blind. It quickly spread across Europe, and within decades, Braille became the foundation for literacy among the blind worldwide. The system's simplicity made it adaptable to any language, as different countries developed their own versions while preserving the 6-dot cell design. In the 20th century, with the rise of education, advocacy, and technology for people with disabilities, Braille became a universal symbol of empowerment and equality. The story of Braille is not only about the invention of a code, it is about the power of human resilience and the determination to break barriers. Louis Braille's childhood accident, which could have ended his dreams, became the spark for one of humanity's greatest innovations in communication. His tactile language gave voice to millions who had been silenced by blindness, proving that knowledge and creativity belong to everyone, regardless of physical ability. Over time, Braille's influence extended far beyond reading and writing. It shaped architecture with public signs, elevators, and ATM machines incorporating Braille dots for accessibility. It entered art and design, inspiring tactile exhibitions and inclusive communication systems. With the rise of digital technology, Braille evolved again. Electronic Braille displays, refreshable screens, and adaptive software have brought the tactile language into the modern world. What began as 6 simple dots in 19th century France has now become a digital language of empowerment in the 21st century. Today, Louis Braille is celebrated as a hero of inclusion and education. His system remains the foundation of literacy for the blind, taught in schools and used in libraries across the globe. The bicentenary of his birth in 2009 was marked by commemorations worldwide, highlighting the enduring impact of his work. In his hometown of Couvray, his house has been preserved as a museum, a place where visitors can feel the spirit of a child who changed the world through touch. Braille's grave at the Pantheon in Paris stands among France's greatest figures, honoring not a conqueror or a king, but a humble teacher whose invention gave light to those who live without sight. His life story reminds humanity that true vision is not limited to the eyes, but to the heart and mind. Through Braille, a blind child in any part of the world can now open a book and experience the joy of learning, imagination, and connection. The world Louis Braille envisioned one, where blindness is not a barrier to understanding, has become a reality, proving that even the smallest ideas can illuminate the darkest paths. The history of Braille is a testament to the enduring strength of human empathy and creativity. From the clumsy embossed letters of the 18th century to the refined tactile code that unites millions today, every dot in the Braille system represents a moment of courage, intelligence, and compassion. Louis Braille's genius turned isolation into communication, despair into hope, and limitation into liberation. His invention did not simply transform the lives of the blind, it transformed the moral vision of society itself, teaching the world that accessibility is not charity, but justice, and that the truest innovations are those that include everyone.